President Trump says he believes the death toll from the coronavirus could reach 100,000 in the U.S. During a town hall on Fox News last night, the president also encouraged governors to continue reopening states. CBS News White House correspondent Paula Reid has more.
Last week, President Trump said up to 70,000 Americans could die from the coronavirus. But last night, he increased that estimate.
We're going to lose anywhere from 75, 80 to 100,000 people. That's a horrible thing.
His top health officials say the number could actually be up to 2.5 times that.
Our projections have always been between 100 and 240,000 American lives lost, and that's with full mitigation and us learning from each other of how to social distance.
But the president is still pushing to reopen the country.
Are you going to urge the nation's universities and schools to go back in September?
I am. I want them to go back. We have to get our country back.
The president says the timeline for each state to reopen will be different, but he suggested some states were even taking too long.
Certain states are going to have to take a little more time in getting open, and they're doing that. Some states, I think, frankly, aren't going fast enough.
Seated at the Lincoln Memorial, Mr. Trump was asked if he was bringing the country together.
I think that winning ultimately is going to bring this country together. I'm shocked that during a crisis it would be so partisan.
But he took no responsibility for the divide, blaming Democrats instead.
The Democrats, the radical left, whatever you want, would rather see people, I'm going to be very nice, I'm not going to say die, I'm going to say would rather see people not get well.
We are not partisan combatants. We are human beings.
Over the weekend, a call for unity came from former President George W. Bush in a video message.
Let us remember how small our differences are in the face of this shared threat.
President Trump took issue with the former president's statements and lashed out at his silence during impeachment. With the number of deaths rising and more Americans losing their jobs, the president is once again laying the blame on China.
My opinion is they made a mistake. They tried to cover it. They tried to put it out. It's like a fire. You know, it's really like trying to put out a fire. They couldn't put out the fire.
And Paula Reid joins me now. Hi, Paula. We know at one point President Trump had praised China's handling of the coronavirus. But Secretary of State Mike Pompeo over the weekend is claiming that China tried to conceal the extent of this outbreak while at the same time stockpiling medical supplies. What evidence might Mr. Pompeo have to suggest this? And Paula, when might we see a report released from the U.S. on the origins of the virus?
Well, Tanya, there's two questions here that the administration is trying to answer. The first is, where exactly did this virus come from? And the second is, well, once it was here, how specifically did China handle it? Now, on that first question, on Friday, the U.S. intelligence agencies came out and they said they have concluded that, in fact, that this virus originated in China, but they have no reason to believe that it was man-made or genetically modified. They also said they would continue to investigate questions about whether this arose as a result of contact between an animal and a human or as the result of an accident in a lab. But both the Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, and President Trump have suggested that there is evidence to suggest that this came out of an accident in a lab. So unclear if they're getting out ahead of the intelligence or if they know something we don't. There's also some of their critics who are claiming that in coming out and saying this, Tanya, they're trying to put pressure on the intelligence community to come up with some evidence to support this. Because this increased scrutiny of China comes at the same time the Trump administration is facing criticism for its handling of this pandemic. Now, on that second question, how did China handle this? Over the weekend, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said that once China learned of the extent of the outbreak, he alleges that they tried to cover it up while stockpiling medical equipment. And to prove this, to support this, there is evidence coming out of the Department of Homeland Security. Most of it is trade data or other publicly available information.
And Paula, as we saw in your story there, President Trump's own infectious disease experts believe the U.S. death toll could potentially be 2 times higher than President Trump predicts. So during that town hall, the president also laid out a timeline for when he believes a vaccine might be readily available. Let's listen.
We are pushing it really hard. We're also pushing something else, the vaccines. We are very confident that we're going to have a vaccine at the end of the year. By the end of the year, have a vaccine.
So, Paula, are the president's top medical experts on the same page with his timeline?
He's not completely off. It's a little more optimistic, a little more aggressive. But here's what we know. We know White House officials, they believe that a cure, first and foremost, or drugs that can help people who have this, that's really the most ideal solution that they would like to get as soon as possible. But a vaccine could help by providing herd immunity. This is one of the keys to getting society back to normal. Now, the president here suggesting that something could be ready at the end of this year. It's possible. We know that his Operation Warp Speed has identified 14 potential vaccines that experts hope could yield about 6 that have some promise. Maybe a few of those could be available late this year, early next year, but that's a very optimistic, aggressive timeline. Last night, specifically, the president mentioned Johnson & Johnson as being close, but they've been clear that they believe that any vaccine, the earliest it would be available, would be early next year. And again, Tanya, we know that when it comes to vaccines, there are no guarantees. Vaccines for HIV and Ebola, they have remained elusive, so there is no guarantee. The president's promise of a vaccine by the end of this year, not impossible, but certainly optimistic based on what we're seeing.
And Paula, the president also said last night there is, quote, more help coming financially. He didn't go into specifics, but what might the White House ask to be included in a potential new stimulus plan?
Well, the only specific he would give, Tanya, is that he wanted a payroll tax cut. This is something he's floated before, but last night in this town hall, it sounded like that was a requirement to get him to sign off on any subsequent aid. That is curious because we know both Democrats and Republicans, when this idea has been floated previously, they've really pushed back on it. There really hasn't been a lot of support. On the Republican side, you have fiscal hawks who are concerned that by taking away that payroll tax cut, by taking away those payroll taxes, both the ones that employers pay and the ones employees pay, you would have to make up that revenue somehow. Doesn't sit well with them. Democrats have also suggested that a payroll tax cut doesn't really provide financial aid to the people who need it the most during the coronavirus. So it's unclear how the president would sell that. Earlier today, Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin was asked about this. He didn't really have any specifics. The president also floated the idea of infrastructure. I can tell you, in talking to top senior administration officials here over the past few years, they all agree that infrastructure is a priority for this administration, but it's largely a local level, and it's not clear how that would really offer aid to folks who have been economically devastated by coronavirus. On the Hill, we've gotten some more specifics. Mitch McConnell has really been pushing for protections for employers from litigation once employees start going back. But otherwise, so far, the White House has really not put forth any specifics about what a phase 4 would look like. And Tanya, I can tell you, I've spoken with sources outside the White House who talk to this White House all the time. This White House is under a lot of pressure not to do another massive $1 trillion stimulus. There are concerns that they are, in these sources' words, incentivizing people not to go back to work.
All right. Well, Paula Reid at the White House, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.